Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our Writing for the Young Adults panel. I'm Christina Cora Beckman, a teen and adult librarian here at El Segundo, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator and middle school librarian, Kim Harris. Kim was born and raised in El Segundo, and growing up, El Segundo Public Library was her home library, and she has many fond memories using the library and participating in programs such as our summer reading program. Kim received her undergraduate degree from UC Davis and her master's in library science and school library certificate from San Jose State. Kim has worked in the school libraries for many years, and in her work at the middle school library, she facilitates programs such as Middle School Book Club and helping kids discover their next great read. Kim is an avid reader herself and particularly enjoys young adult fiction and mysteries. She also enjoys traveling and baking. Please join me in welcoming Kim Harris.
Thanks for that great introduction, Christina. Welcome to our 20th annual Author Fair. This is the YA panel, and it's featuring authors Kayla Cagan, Marissa Kennerson, Katrina Leno, Andrew Smith, and Mike Wellman. Thank you all so much for coming and taking part of our fair. Okay, Kayla Cagan is the author of Piper Parish and Art Boss, both of which center around art and artists. Piper Parish was a Barnes & Noble Book of the Month in 2017, and Art Boss is the sequel. Before she wrote her novels, Kayla wrote short plays, monologues, comics, and essays. She grew up in Houston, Texas, and lived in New York City for 11 years before moving here. One unique trait in her novels is that they almost always have a central conflict with her YA's character siblings. This is because each has a different story and a different perspective. Marissa Kennerson is the author of the fantasy novel Tarot and the thriller The Family, which is about a cult. She wants to be clear that the family is entirely made up, and the only cult she belongs to is that of YouTube makeup tutorials. Marissa received her BA from UC Berkeley and has a master's degree in psychology and art therapy. Before writing full-time, she worked for the magazines Wired and Glamour. Katrina Leno has written 5 books, including The Lost and Found and her latest, You Must Not Miss, which is a thriller that is best described as One of Us is Lying meets Carrie. It is a twisted and suspenseful tale of magic, menace, and the monsters that live inside us all. Marissa is also a musician and is in the band The July. And I really like that band. I listened to it on YouTube. She received her master's in creative writing from Scotland and moved to Los Angeles afterwards. All of her books have a little magical realism in them. Everything Marissa writes has some darkness in them because she does too. Oh, sorry, Katrina, sorry. I was writing this at work, and the kids distracted me. She's battled with depression since age 13 and writes to give hope to others. Andrew Smith has written over 10 novels, including Winger, Rabbit and Robot, and Grasshopper Jungle, which won the 2015 Michael L. Prince Honor, 2014 Boston Globe Horn Book Award, and the Carnegie Medal Longlist. His latest novel is Exile from Eden, a sequel to Grasshopper Jungle. Andrew wrote for newspapers and radio stations after graduating from college, but found it wasn't what he wanted to do. He is a native Californian and traveled a lot before becoming a high school teacher and award-winning author. Mike Wellman is the writer and co-creator of Guns A-Blazing with his collaborator, artist, and co-creator Rafael Navarro. His writing credits include the comics and graphic novels Mac Afro and Gone South, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, and the World of Warcraft. He is the co-owner of the comic book shop The Comic Bug with Jun Goku. Mike also is the editor for comic books and children's books. Some of his works include The Snake Who Would Not Bend and A Totally True Princess Story. Okay, now for our questions. My first question, what inspired you to want to write YA literature?
I'll start because I'm alphabetically at the top. Sorry, guys. So I didn't know when I started writing a novel necessarily that I was going to write young adult characters, but in all my theater writing and the other writings I did, I always tended to focus on teens and younger adults. And so when I started I always read novels, but I read mostly adult fiction. And then I started kind of dabbling into reading young adult fiction, only because I kept saying, I really like all these teen characters and teen protagonists, and I kind of like seeing their journey more than the journey I don't need to read about myself. I'm in my 40s. I know what I do. So I was like, let me keep reading these. And then through friends in the publishing industry and marketing, they're like, it's called young adult. That's how we sell it. That's what it is. And I didn't know, but I gravitate towards those stories. And it always was just something. I still care about young people figuring out the world because it helps the rest of us try to do it too. So I was just drawn to that age range without knowing it was actually young adult in the beginning.
When I was a very sensitive teen and artistic teen and raw. So when I was practicing therapy, I wanted to work with teens. I thought it was just a spot that I could still relate to and, again, help people through. So writing for them just felt like sort of a natural fit. Everything is so... You just feel so deeply, I think, when you're a teen, and I wanted to talk to that audience and let them see themselves in my books, if possible, and think like, I'm not so abnormal. Someone else has felt this way.
I think teens are the most interesting age group of people, and I started writing when I was a teen myself, so I think naturally I was writing about myself and my friends, and then as I grew up, I noticed that I was still writing about people of that certain age, and it never really changed. And I always think whenever I finish my next YA novel that I'm going to write something more in line with my age now or the things I'm experiencing now, but I keep going back to that age group. I just think there's a lot to unpack there, especially as a now old person. I think about that time in my life a lot, and it's taught me who I was then has evolved a lot, and in other ways it hasn't evolved at all, and it's always a part of me. I think that we carry with us the age we are every year of our lives, and those personalities are all inside us at all times. So I don't know. That's the one that just keeps coming out for me.
I started college when I was 16 years old, and I always wrote, and when I was about right around that age, 15 or so, and my parents asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I told them I wanted to be a writer, and they were against the idea, so I think that's why I became a writer. And all of my jobs after college were writing jobs, but I hated them, and I kept quitting. And I kept writing my whole life. And then one day, about 15 years ago, a friend of mine that I'd known since high school, who's a published author, she dared me into submitting a manuscript to an agent. And I didn't want to, but I took the dare, and so I submitted something that I had on my hard drive. And the agent flew out here to LA and offered me representation, and then that book sold right away at auction. And then, and so I was kind of like trapped into it. What I'd done out of rebelliousness towards my parents ended up being like something that I kind of painted myself into a corner for the rest of my life. And so here I am. I don't think I write for young people, though. I just write about them. And most of my readership is probably skews to be a little bit older than quote-unquote young adult. But I enjoy doing what I do very much.
Hey, I'm Mike. So I write for all kinds of different audiences, young adult being one of them, mostly in editing capacity. I've had clients that hire me to kind of oversee projects, and one was for his daughter's bedtime story, and I advised him that it should take less than 2 hours to read. So I'm just here for some common sense things. The comic I do, it's a comic book, so maybe people think it's for young kids. It's really a grown man's fantasy. It's about time-traveling cowboys who meet cave women and fall in love and save the dinosaurs and stuff like that, which is the kind of stuff that rolls through my head. But yeah, I think that the stories I like to tell are fun and bouncy and full of color and loud, and certainly young adults could enjoy that. But so can us, everybody here. So yeah.
Hey, how do you get inspiration for your stories?
Want to take
Wanna
one?
go first?
Sure. Everywhere. Like if I go and see an amazing film, or I hear a song, or I read someone else's memoir, could be just taking a hike and seeing a beautiful view. Usually it's outside of traditional sort of story ideas, but just anything in life that kind of gets my juices flowing. So nothing is safe. Something you might be wearing might inspire me to go home and write about you. Like I'm liking that necklace a lot.
In my younger years, as I'd continue to quit jobs and just leave and wander around, I was always a journalist, and I kept journals. I always wrote, and I think it's a universal experience that people, when they encounter something that's new, some new, fresh experience, that they tell themselves, one day I'm going to write a story about this. Which is why I kept writing throughout my life. And then when I finally settled down and decided that I should probably get gainful employment, I just fell into teaching, and I've been teaching high school for 27 years at the same school. So I get like 200 stories every day, and that do actually very frequently end up in my books. And so I have no shortage of new ideas that I'm ready to tackle.
Yeah, just living life. One of the stories I did was a book called Gone South, and it's about these two New York City vampire girls hiding in the Deep South, which I grew up in North Carolina. And the inspiration for that, I was at a red light in North Carolina, and there was a lady pushing a cart across the street, and she still had her curlers in her hair. And I was just thinking, like, wow, if that was LA, you'd probably think this person's a little off track, but this is a normal thing here. So, but you got to throw vampires in there. You can't just write about people in hair curlers crossing the streets, But it's social commentary. If you got something you want to say, a message you want to portray, get across, I think sometimes it's good. Like one of my favorite stories is Battlestar Galactica, and it was brought back in the early 2000s as we were going to war in Iraq. And it was kind of commentary on that, but in a perspective of humans versus Cylons, which are the evil robots. But throughout the series, you kind of learn, oh, maybe the Cylons aren't the bad guys. Maybe we are. Maybe humans are. So I think it's a good way to, through fiction, you can provoke thought and inspire action.
I'm kind of a master eavesdropper, so I will overhear. Like people go to coffee shops to write, I go to listen, and I will just sit there and be like. I'll put a notebook in front of me, but literally I have no edit filter. So like when I hear it all the conversations start happening, and for me it all becomes dialogue, and then I have to figure out who that character is, and then I have to figure out why they're telling their story or what they're doing. But I also get, before the news is what it is now, I used to grab things off tabloid news, like the National Enquirer, where it was like, UFO lands in Utah and eats a cake or whatever they do. But like I used to see those really super surreal and obviously super fake headlines, and oftentimes that would trigger me to write a play, and somehow that headline would usually be part of the reason. But the flip side is, as much as I love kind of speculative stuff that can happen, especially through the news cycle and things like that, I also am a real proponent of telling stories of kids who get out of situations they feel trapped in. So a lot of times, all I have to kind of do is look at the world around us and see what's going on, and those stories kind of get me more in my heart, where I start writing from that place. And the other side is the funny side, so it kind of depends on what mood I'm in and what I've heard that day.
I think I've learned for myself that the quickest way to feel uninspired is to try and find something that inspires me. And I run into that a lot whenever I'm thinking about what I'm going to work on next. Usually I'm in the editing phase of a book that I'm working on, and then I get to the end of the editing phase, so I want to jump into a new project. And I don't have any ideas, so I'm trying to find things that will spark, inspiration, and just anything in life, you can't force, any inspiration ever. So the best way for me is to really stop thinking about writing. And, I do journal pretty much every day and think about writing pretty much every day, but I don't follow the school of thought that you actually have to be writing, toward a finished work every day, or writing a book every day, or writing fiction every day. So I try and put that away and just live life like a normal person, and see what happens in a day where I'm not looking for that spark, and usually that's when I find it.
Okay. Where do you like to write? Do you have a designated area, a playlist that you listen to, a specific room or time of day? Or do you write wherever you can, wherever and whenever you can?
I'll jump in. I live in a very rural area up in the mountains, and I raise horses. And we heat our home with a wood stove. There's no traffic lights. It's 20 miles to the closest grocery store from my house. And that's where I write. And I knew when I moved there 25 years ago that it would be a really productive place for me, because I need quiet. I don't listen to anything when I write. When I'm traveling a lot for work, I do have to sometimes switch back and forth with different computers and things, which I really don't like, but because I'm really kind of stuck into one place only for doing my work.
So making comics is a collaborative process. So the first step that my artist and I do, with this particular project, you don't always have this luxury. We get together, I'll make dinner, we'll have wine, we'll talk about kind of what sort of loose ideas, what he wants to draw, and then I will take notes, and then when I'm by myself in the kitchen is where my computer is, and I'll type it out into a story. And writing for comics is different than writing novels. But you're communicating to the artist. Like, you want to communicate to the artist. This is what you want to draw, and then, usually the dialogue is already there. Sometimes we tweak that. Sometimes he'll draw different things than I wrote because he might have a better idea visually for what could happen. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a multi-layered process that I really enjoy. So.
Out of necessity of having a 9-to-5 job, I write in the mornings. So I usually get up at 6 and make coffee and write for 2 hours and then go to work. And I usually don't write after work because I'm very tired and have to make dinner and exercise and go to sleep and do it all the next day. And on the weekends, I used to get really guilt heavy if I wasn't producing enough work. And as I've continued on this path, I realized that I'm not writing good content if I'm grouchy and tired. I really, I try and keep my weekends at least one day just very no writing and going out and having fun, or doing something like this, or going to yoga, or whatever. And then maybe the other day I'll start writing a little. But I like writing outside of my house when I can, because I don't want to get stuck into one routine. I find for me that starts to become a problem if I don't have my routine. I almost use it as an excuse to not write. So I think it's important to both have a routine but be able to break out of that routine whenever possible.
Sure. I want to write at his house.
That's so good.
That's my favorite. If I'm somewhere beautiful and quiet, I really can get a lot of writing done. The reality is I'm usually at my kitchen table and I'm looking at the dishes and a pile of laundry, and I just have to sort of block it out and get some writing done. I heard the other day almost nobody writes in the afternoon. Do you guys agree with that?
Totally.
Either late at night or in the morning. I'm a morning person, but I thought that was funny. I don't want to write in the middle of the afternoon.
I do have to do it sometimes in the afternoon just because of my schedule, but
Yeah.
I hate it when I do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, nah. I mostly write at home, but I live with a writer. My husband's a writer, and we have very different methods. I prefer mostly quiet unless I'm having trouble getting into a character, and then I will find the music that I think is their speed and their tone and their pace, and that helps me. And sometimes I'll paint my nails their color. I'll be like, yeah, she's badass. She'll wear black nail polish or whatever. But then I see her hands doing the storytelling instead of mine, and that helps me get in her headspace. But my husband, who's a writer, will blast the loudest, like, speed metal and punk. And I like punk, but I don't love speed metal. And he will blast it, and that's how he's like, yeah, I got 3 hours of work done. I'm like, but he's like, for him, it blocks everything out. For me, it makes me feel forced in. So, actually, and it sounds like I'm kissing butt, but I go to my library a lot. I write at the 2 libraries that are near me, and then where we live, there are a lot of coffee shops and a lot of writers, and a lot of us know each other, and so it becomes too communal in a way. We don't get our work done, but I'll go there on a quieter part of the day, like the afternoon when they're not there. But mostly the library, actually. Melrose Branch. It's good.
Okay. The majority of all your books are either fantasy, science fiction, or have magical realism in them. Did you include this on purpose, or did it come organically while writing the books?
I'll start. So, I mean, with comic books, you have really, when it comes to visuals, no budget, like, so why write a comic book story about some people in an office when you can write, post-apocalyptic muscle cars and cavemen and there's a character called the Void in this one who's like basically so these guys are time travelers and they kind of screw up the space-time continuum. So all the dead realities go into this guy. And so it's like, yeah, why write about office work when you can write about this? Yeah.
Mine is it takes the tarot deck, like tarot cards, and it makes them into characters in the world. So it was just built into the idea. It had to sort of be, because the magician in the deck is actually a character, and cups is actually the land where they go into. So everything was fantasy sort of from the start.
Andrew? Because I think Grasshopper Jungle is science fiction, but that's me.
Well, I totally thought it was real when I was writing it. I think that the vehicle of speculative fiction, or maybe I wouldn't say magical realism in things that I write, but kind of speculative fiction with a bend towards science fiction, I think is, for me, it's kind of the perfect vehicle for bringing attention to issues that are really, I think, important issues of the day without actually coming right out and saying, this is what I'm poking fun at, or this is maybe a different way that you should think about these kinds of things. At least that's what I was looking for in Grasshopper Jungle, which I didn't even ever really intend to publish, but I did pretty well, I guess.
My first 2 are more contemporary and not necessarily in that, but the novel I'm working on right now is speculative, and basically I got the idea off a headline I read out of a paper out of Australia that I don't want to say what it is because then it will say what the idea is, but I'm working on that right now, and so it's my first adventure into it. Yes.
Most of my books have an element of magic or fantasy in them, and it's definitely always been purposeful for me. It was always a coping method for me. So in my books, there's always a purposeful reason for the magic. It's either to talk about something without talking about it, or tease it as a placeholder for something much darker that a character is dealing with. My last book, You Must Not Miss, is about a girl who makes a world out of her own sadness and anger, and it becomes real, and she can go into it and kind of do whatever she wants. And obviously that would be very appealing for a lot of people if you had a place where you could go that you're sort of king of everything and queen of everything. So I think as a coping mechanism for me, and as a stand-in a lot of the time for mental illness and mental health reasons, that's why I seem to keep coming back to that.
Okay. Graphic novels are becoming more and more popular now. My students love reading graphic novels. I know Andrew made one of his novels into a graphic novel, and Mike writes graphic novels and comics. Are any of you considering writing a graphic novel or revising one of your previous works into a graphic novel?
I would love to. I have had an idea for a graphic novel for a really long time, and I've never gotten around to it, but it's like always in the back of my head. And I think that would be awesome. It would definitely be a different sort of experience writing it. Writing for me is very, it's like me and my computer for hours and hours and hours. And there's something very appealing about having that turn into a collaborative process that you were talking about. I love that. I love the idea of like having, a glass of wine with someone who's gonna make pictures out of my ideas. I think that sounds great.
I've always wanted to do comic books and graphic novels, and actually one of my early books called Winger is kind of hybridized. There's some comic book pages in the middle of the book, and because I had intended to do it as a graphic novel, and then I realized that it's so hard to draw and it takes so much time that by the time I drew one page of comic panels that I could write 15 or 20 pages of prose. And so I would always end up giving up. But every book that I've written, I always draw in the pages while I'm writing it. And when I send the manuscripts to my editor, they always come with pictures in them. And this one that just came out, I was drawing in the pages when I sent it in, and not with the intention that my editor would ever think that I was a decent artist, but because I wanted them to hire somebody to do the artwork for me, and then they said, "Oh, we want to use your artwork. We're going to actually put your artwork in it." And I was mortified because I had thrown it all away. But they did. They ended up using my artwork in this book. So there's like 14 or 15 pictures that I drew right on the page while I was writing it. So I'm kind of happy about that. And I'm also right now working on a graphic novel with the illustrator Matt Faulkner, who's an amazing, amazing illustrator. And that one, it's an awful lot of work. It should be coming out soon, though.
I ran a workshop recently with an illustrator, and nothing to do with my book. We just sort of got, actually I was doing an event in Barnes & Noble in Huntington Beach, and I don't know anyone down there, and I thought this is going to be really small. Let me bring another author, and we'll make it a workshop, so if there's 2 people or 10 or 20. And what we did was we did a writing exercise, and then we had them build a character through words, and then we built it together, her drawing. And I love that intersection so much. I have a disconnect with graphic novels. I can't read them for some reason. I just get kind of, but I love the idea of them so much. I won't ever write one, unfortunately. But
Do you read
respect.
manga?
What?
Do you read manga?
No, I can't read comic books either. It's the weirdest thing.
No,
My brain just
I know
kind of.
several people that have that issue.
Yeah, I went to that neat place in Glendale, and I got this Batman one. I love Batman, and I was like, so excited, but my brain just is like, no, I don't.
Yeah, connecting the words and pictures, and some people have an issue. So I am opening a new store in Long Beach next month, and we're going to have weekly meetups from 7 to 10 p.m. So the store's called Atomic Basement, and the 7 to 10 p.m. on Wednesdays, it's going to be called The Lab. And people can come and work on their books, and once a year we're going to publish somebody's book. So
That's so
if you guys are
That's
interested,
great.
I love that.
Yeah.
that's it.
cool.
Yeah.
That's
Let
so
me know.
cool.
I really like reading graphic novels and comic books, and I've worked on a couple of comic books and been in some comic book anthologies over the years. I haven't thought about ever turning in any of my books into graphic novels, not because they're not visual enough, but I just kind of thought of it in that one kind of medium to tell the story. But I will say, again, this sounds real kiss buddy, but the reason I found out that I could write a novel and have illustrations, both my books have a lot of illustrations and drawings in them, is because I read Winger. And that was the book that it was the first time I ever saw illustrations in a book that wasn't a comic book or a graphic novel. And I remember showing friends and going, look at this book, it has cartoons in it. And they were like, yeah, we know. I was like, yeah, I didn't know that was possible. So that actually, and so my book, when I was submitting it to agents and then eventually when I went to editors, I would write a space saying, drawing goes here, drawing is of a Madonna t-shirt from 1989 or whatever it was. And I said, can you have somebody draw this? And they're like, yeah, that's what we do. We know how to work with people. But it blew my mind because I never thought that was possible until I read Winger.
And Art Boss has a lot of drawings in it.
Yeah, Art Boss and Piper, because she's an artist and it's written like a diary, so it has like ink blotches and mess ups and scratch outs and drawings and the illustrator who did it is incredible. It is not me.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you promote your books? Do you use social media exclusively, or do you promote in other ways?
I promote on Instagram and Facebook, and by getting out to as many conventions as I can. I promote in libraries. This is meant for effect. No, I really have a hard time saying no to anything, and so, if somebody invites me to a convention, me and Raphael pack up our bags and we hit it, and we just kind of while we're at the convention, you're not just there at the convention doing your thing, you're also promoting the fact that you're there. I think I had Christine take a picture out front. It's like, hey, I'm here. And there's John. He's here because he probably saw the picture. Maybe, I don't know. But you just gotta, when you're in this line of work, you have to be shamelessly self-promoting all the time because nobody else is going to do it for you for the most part, I don't think. So.
I feel social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm sometimes on Twitter and sometimes I'm not because Twitter is an interesting place. I do a lot of library school conferences or conventions. There's a lot of like the American Library Association does a lot of different kind of conventions and conferences throughout the year, and I do those. And I've had a publisher that's helpful to me getting into certain bookstores to do events with other authors and to interview other authors or whatnot. But pretty much if there's an option to do that or do writing workshops with kids, because that's still part of the writing process for me is like developing. I stay pretty open to it, but it is kind of, the more you do, the more you might get back from doing it, I think.
Social media obviously is, taking over our lives, and it feels okay most days. Not so great other days. It's a necessary evil, I think. And it's interesting because when I was probably like 22, living in New York, that's when Tumblr came out. And Tumblr's still around now, but it's very different. And back then it was, before Tumblr, I was on LiveJournal. And I had a big LiveJournal. And I think LiveJournal is now defunct. Maybe it's still in archives somewhere. But I kind of grew up with those blogs and those online journals. So I had a lot of practice, like deciding what to share about myself. Even before I was promoting, actively promoting things, I was sharing things about myself. And there's, an interesting sort of thing at work there of how much do I want to share, how personal do I want to get versus how much do people care, how much are people reading. And that's sort of segued into Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, which I have all of them, of course, and probably use Instagram the most because visually it's like a small Tumblr and it feels very manageable and straightforward, and you take a photo and then you talk about the photo and then you make a video and all that. And I do find that the people who are reading my books, they're all on Instagram, and the engagement is really special to me. I've had a lot of people, that I talked to and that I became friends with on Instagram, and even though maybe there's an inclination to be like faceless social media, so scary, but there's actually, you can find like real personal human connection. So I think that it's important to like look for those when you're in the process of promoting and talking about yourself online.
I might just hop on to that. I agree, the Bookstagram community is really special. Mm-hmm. It's kind of amazing, but I'm either in promo mode and I'm on Instagram, or I'm writing, and I can't do both. I can come out to something like this and I love it and it makes me want to go home and write and I feel inspired, but as far as social media goes, like if you don't see me for 4 months, it's because I'm writing and I can't do both. It's too distracting. But I do feel like I've made amazing connections in the Instagram, Bookstagram community. It's so special, really neat.
Bookstagram is great. Twitter, not so great.
No. If you're an author or a reader, sometimes I feel like, or both, I mean.
And Goodreads for authors. Oh.
Yeah,
it's a scary place. Don't go there.
I go to Goodreads.
Well, who knew authors were supposed to promote themselves? I thought I was supposed to make as many people pissed off as possible on social media. I don't. So I don't promote myself or my books. I'm on social media, and I mean, I do the typical things. My publishers send me on tours, and I think there's been maybe 3 states I haven't been sent to yet. And as far as Southern California is concerned, pretty much any time a school or a library in Southern California asks if I'd be willing to come down and give a talk, I'd be happy to do that. But other than that, I'm just pretty much a recluse.
Okay. Many of you wrote short stories or comics before you wrote a novel. Was it a difficult transition going from writing a short piece of work to writing a full-length book?
Oh, great question.
It wasn't, what was difficult for me was the stamina of my novels are both around 400 pages, one's a little less. Plays and comics are a lot shorter generally, unless you're writing like The Watchmen or something, I don't know, like something bigger. But for me, it was kind of enduring, like, if I commit to starting to write this book, and I'm a person who has to finish it, even if it doesn't have to be a good draft, I have to finish it. I mean, that's, to me, because I'm a slow writer and I'm a slow reader, it will take me, at least a year and a half. And I do have friends, like romance writers write books and they turn them out in like 3 months at a time, the ones I know. And I'm like, how do you have 3 books you wrote this year? I don't understand. My brain can't work that way. So it was harder for me to jump into it, but I've always loved reading fiction. And I realized now that I wrote several books that never came out. They weren't good. They were like learning how to write novels. I did that for many years before I got an agent. And I think I got used to the practice of like, when you commit to a longer project, it takes a longer time. You have to kind of see your timeline and go, you willing to do this? You cared this much about this story? Okay, I'm comfortable with novel writing. But and now it's weird for me to write something really short. Like I feel like I'm skipping a step or cheating somehow. But I like it. I like the longer. I started reading books that are like 800 pages. I'm like, that looks good. But no, it's not gonna happen.
I really admire that. I jump ship on myself all the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll start a novel, and I'm so excited about it, and then I'm like, I lose interest. The short story saved me in the beginning, and when I was in my 20s, because I used to write a lot of pieces, and then it really taught me to have a beginning, middle, and an end, whether that was 2 pages or 20 pages or 10 pages. And when going into, I loved writing a novel. I've written 2 now. I love it. So, but the short story I feel like was my training ground, and it was easy to commit to and finish. That was so. But I really admire that.
Yeah.
I'd be so prolific.
So would I.
I started writing. I mean, I started writing way before we ever had anything like the internet, and everything that the most valuable lessons I ever learned about writing, I learned from my newspaper editors when my first jobs were actually writing for small newspapers, and that's where I learned the most. And in those days we used typewriters and carbon paper. And when you use typewriters and carbon paper, you have to kind of commit to being good in the first try because I could not imagine writing a novel without find and replace and things like that we take for granted now. But when I started to when I started to challenge myself to write things that were longer, I kept telling myself that when I'd get to a certain spot, that I was going to break down and tell my wife that I'm writing a book. And I never told my wife that I wrote books until I actually got an offer from a publisher. And then I had to admit to her that all that time that I spend in my office, that I was writing. And she didn't know because she thought that I was engaged in online affairs or something. And so she was pretty surprised. But I think that it was just the lessons that I learned from newspaper reporting and writing for radio station news. Those were the most important skills that I developed that were pretty easy to then turn into that self-discipline that you need for developing something that's a longer project like a novel.
I think it's good to kind of start small. Short stories or maybe a 3-issue miniseries in this case, because you're gonna make mistakes. And I've met so many aspiring comic creators who they'll come and we have comic creator groups at the Comic Bug and stuff, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna do a 36 issue epic, thing with mythology and this and that. And I'm like, you might want to try something a little smaller, and, figure out how this works, and form your skills, because you don't come out of the garage knowing what you're doing, And I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm still learning, and so. And plus, I have a short attention span, so short stories really suit me well. Yeah. I'm both creating and reading them. So.
I definitely started off writing short stories in all through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And then when I wrote my first novel, I think something interesting happened, and I forgot how to write short stories. And I find now that writing short stories is so much harder than writing novels. Especially good short stories. Yeah, you can write them really quickly, but they're probably not good. And the reason for that is because you have to accomplish a lot in a very small amount of space. And with a novel, you have way more room for development and character development and arcs and secondary storylines and all of this. So I love to read short stories now, and I think some of the best writers of our of the history of the whole wide world is, authors who basically only wrote short stories, and they're incredible. And so I admire short stories very much, but at this point, I find novel writing to be, oddly enough, less daunting.
I just want to share a quote with you guys. I heard that somebody said novelists are just failed short story writers. And I was like, it's true. Like, everyone I know is like, oh yeah, no way, can't do it.
Well, I'd like to add something to that too, because I do agree that writing a short story is more difficult than writing a novel in so many ways. But this is a job, and I've been really fortunate because my job has allowed me to put my kids through college and have some pretty amazing experiences. Short stories, I'll be honest, short stories just don't pay very well. And it takes so much work to do a short story. So I've been in a number of anthologies, and I've been asked to be in a lot more that I've said no to, simply because of how difficult it is to write a short story. And the bottom line is that it just really translates into just almost no pay for all of that effort. Sorry to get dirty and talk about money, but that's a reality. It's how I make a living. And writing Kurt Vonnegut lamented about the death of being able to write short stories as a profession back in the 1960s or 1970s, and I agree. It's just you have to be almost like a saint to be able to write a short story and then keep doing it time and time again.
I just want to jump in there. Like, for me right now, I'm between novels. I've got a couple that I've pitched to my agent, but I'm going to write a short story. I just decided this the other day, just to get back to the joy of writing and not worrying about selling, because that can be, a little. So I'm super excited to just write one for myself, and probably won't show it to anyone, but I need to get back to that part of myself of just writing. So.
Okay, what is your writing process? Do you outline, have a specific path you want to follow, or do you just write?
I think it depends for me on the project, because the story I'm writing right now, I found out I'm not much of an outliner, but I needed to kind of know where I was going. I knew exactly how I was going to open. I knew the middle, which is really hard to know the middle sometimes. And the end, I was like, ooh, big old question mark. Like, I was like, I don't know. So I kind of had to give myself a path and a roadmap. But generally, the outlining to me feels too grounding, and I don't feel like there's an escape route. I always need to be able to make my characters or get surprised by them. So I tend not to, except for this one book. I don't know.
Once again, opposite. I love outlines, and I've tried to not have them, and I just get lost, and I meander, and I feel that they're very, I can write an outline, and I can always change it. So, but for me, I need that structure to start. Helps me.
Like when you use a GPS, you look at an address up and it kind of shows it. So that's like the broad stroke of what your story is going to be. Then you zoom in a little bit, and you get your page breakdowns, and you zoom in a little bit more, and you get your dialogue and your actions and stuff. That's my process, like getting lost in a map.
Yeah, I like that. Good way to put it.
I don't outline, and I don't draft either. I just write. and when I'm finished, I send it in to my agent, my editor. And so, I mean, and so it's a good thing because now so far we've heard from 4 people who all do it differently. And I think that writing is kind of the most important thing, is that it's an exploration of trying to find the path that works most productively for you. But I don't believe in drafting. I definitely resist outlining. And the reason I don't draft is that, and I do know maybe one other author who does not draft, David Levithan. I'm sure a number of his books are in here. And he, like myself, I mean, we have this idea that, I mean, if you're building a house, you don't draft a house and then go back and fix all the things that you did sloppily on the way from the foundation to the roof. When you build a house, you want to move into it right away. That's just my philosophy of writing, too. It goes back to those paper and carbon paper and typewriter days, is that you want to just try to build it as perfectly as possible the first time through. And then I don't revisit it. When I'm finished with something, it goes right to my agent and my editor, and I'm done.
I would like to add, I try to do that, but then my editors send back all these changes. But I thought it was perfect every time I turned it in.
That's how they make a
No,
living.
but I don't do a bunch of drafts. I do one, and then I turn it in and try it to be the best thing it can be. And then I have to rewrite it because they said so.
Even if it was perfect, your editor would send it back.
Exactly.
And that's how they keep their jobs.
I also don't outline, and I think the reason why I don't is because I have terrible memories of outlining essays in high school and really hating it. And I think that even back then it was a way of stifling creativity, but that might be for a different talk. But I think now not outlining keeps writing really fun for me. And it's really exciting to go into a book and not know every single thing that's going to happen. But again, I like the idea that every writer has a different process and there's no right answer for anything. And sometimes if I do get edits back from my editor or my agent, I will then outline after I have a completed book, which may seem a little strange, but it often helps me narrow down the book in a way that I don't think it would have been as helpful for me before I actually wrote the book. So that's just something to think about.
Great. That's the end of my questions. Does anybody in the audience have questions for our wonderful authors? Yes.
I'm Linda. Thank you for all you've shared today. I was wondering, what do you think the difference is between someone who writes a book and never is able to get it published and someone who writes a book like all of you and gets it published? What makes the difference to? Is it money? Is it connections? What makes that difference?
Paycheck, right?
Yeah.
Oh, but why does it happen? Like, I think it's, being in the right place at the right time. A mixture. Someone says, Stephen King, maybe it's sort of like a talent, right place, right time.
Determination?
Yeah, but I feel like things happen where people are really lucky, not necessarily super determined. So I do, and you could have a really talented person who just never meets the right people, or they sent it to so and so was having a bad day and they weren't interested, so I don't know that there's like I definitely would not say, it's because published authors are much more talented than people who aren't. I don't think it's that. Would you agree?
I think you deal with a lot of rejection, and you have to be stubborn. I've had a ton of rejection starting out, and finally I just broke down and published my own first book. And then people see, oh wow, this guy can actually do this, and then then you start hopefully getting paid gigs. And so I've gone through that, and I'm in a place now where I can publish my own books and have my own properties, they call it IP, intellectual property. And we don't have to answer to anybody. We get invited to shows and stuff, which is really cool. But yeah, it's perseverance, and your writing career is going to have phases. And the first phase is kind of maybe where you are now, where you're in the cocoon, and then you write your story and you bust out and you're a beautiful butterfly.
I
Get paid.
I think it's time. I really think it's time, because all of us at one point, even those of us who were writing as kids, we were always writing. We weren't always published. All of us weren't published at one point. And those of us who kept kind of going at it and trying or writing different stories or learning more. Like sometimes, your story isn't there yet. Sometimes that's why people aren't connecting. Sometimes you send it to 10 people who aren't looking for the kind of story you're telling. And like doing your research ahead of time can also help you narrow down, like, well, my friend said they're an agent and they know editors. Yeah, but if they don't represent this kind of story you're telling, that doesn't matter. That's not going to work. But you have to stay with it long enough. Like, I didn't publish my first novel until I was 43. I had been writing since I was 14. You know, like, so it's one of those things of the timeline. If you can allow yourself to know that publishing it may be somewhere down that timeline and it's not your time, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't write, because writing and publishing are different things. I think it's just time. I really do.
Okay, yes.
Hi, thanks for coming out today. Did your first piece get published through a publishing house or an agent? Or I know some self-published, but your first paid piece?
Well, kind of like this dovetails on the last question. I don't handle rejection very well, which it probably explains why my wife and I have been married for 30 years, close to 30 years. But so my first thing, I didn't know what I was doing. I sent something to an agent, and then the agent offered representation, and then it sold at auction in New York to a publishing house. If that book had been rejected, I probably would have been totally happy, not ever trying again, because I didn't really want to get published ever to begin with. And every time a book comes out, I get depressed, and it's like I don't really want. It's just kind of I guess this is kind of a deep, dark illness of mine, but I kind of like I never really wanted to be published. So it's just kind of something that happened. I mean, it's very fortunate. It's been a really good ride, but I would have been just as happy, and I would have kept on writing and loving writing just as much as I do, maybe even more if the first thing that I had submitted had been rejected. I'd been perfectly happy to just do what I do.
My first publisher was a really small digital publisher, and then my second one was Penguin. So different, you know. I'm the opposite. Like I always wanted to share. I wanted to be published more than anything. That was like my dream. And then your dream changes once you get published. You're like, well, now I want more sales, or whatever it is.
My theater stuff was published mostly through theatrical publishers, but my story was a little bit long. But I had an agent in 2005 who was not a good agent. My book was sold, but my editor was fired. Her boss was fired, and that part of the imprint of the publisher I was with closed. So I stopped. Like, I was like, I hate publishing and everything about it. And my agent ran off because she had a gambling debt. And she, like, left New York City. It was like a whole scandal thing. So I was like, screw publishing. I don't know anything about this. I started again trying in 2013, and I queried the book I was working on out to an agent. My agent, the agent I ended up with, really wanted it. She took it out. It went to auction. And so I went to Chronicle Books. But so far, that's who I've been with, and it worked out. But traditional publisher.
Yeah, I went the traditional route as well, and I think I learned pretty quickly that it's less romantic and more, they're a business, and it's a business transaction. So I learned to accept that and make it work for part of the creative process, because not every part of publishing a book is creative. A lot of it is, but not every part.
Some of it's boring. That's also a secret that nobody tells you. Like, nobody wants emails about meetings. Like, nobody wants that. It's the same work stuff you do everywhere else.
Okay, that concludes our. That's a good note to conclude.
Well, sorry, that sounded like such a bummer note. Writing is great. Don't stop doing it. Like, that's better than it's boring sometimes.
All of our authors will be over there to sign books. You can buy their books in the front. And thank you so much for coming, and we enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys.